I'm Rachel Monroe, and I turned 39 this spring in Jackson, Mississippi. The day started out with high hopes and a long guest list. I'd rented out the back room at my favorite southern kitchen spot, the kind of place with sweet tea on tap and cornbread warm from the oven. I'd called my mom the night before to confirm everything was set, and she told me she'd bring the dessert platter, the good kind with pecan pie and banana pudding from her freezer. But 3 hours before the dinner, my phone buzzed, and I saw a message from my dad. 5 words long. No explanation, no apology. Just don't expect anyone to show. I sat there staring at the screen. Dress zipped up, hair done, candles waiting on the table, and that's when I opened social media and saw it, a photo of them all in Miami, smiling under the palm trees. Before I go any further, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from, and hit that like button if you've ever had to smile through something that hurt more than you'd admit out loud. I've lived in Jackson my whole life, aside from a few semesters I spent up in Memphis before moving back home. I've worked in real estate since I was 25, and over time I built a modest portfolio, 6 buildings, 25 units total, all of them right here in town. I didn't come from money, not even close. My grandmother left me a small inheritance when she passed, and I used every penny to buy my first duplex. I worked weekends showing apartments, did my own bookkeeping, fixed leaky sinks after midnight. My family liked to tell people we'd built something together, but the truth is, I built it while they benefited from it. My dad always used to call it our family legacy, like he'd contributed more than words and Sunday advice. For the past 5 years, my parents, my brother, and my aunt have lived in units I own, all paying well below what anyone else would. Brad runs some kind of consulting gig out of one of my commercial spaces. I say runs lightly because I've never seen a client come through the door. I let it slide because that's what family does. Or at least that's what I thought. My mom always said we were blessed to be close, and I believed her for a long time. I gave quietly, never asked for recognition. I just wanted them to feel stable, cared for, even if they didn't always say thank you. When I met Eric 3 years ago, I finally had someone in my corner who didn't treat me like a walking checkbook. He owns a little repair shop on the east side of town, nothing flashy, but he's steady, patient, and honest. He brings me lunch when I forget to eat, checks the locks when I'm out late doing showings, and has never once asked for anything from me except time. My family never liked him. My brother calls him blue collar like it's a slur. My mom once asked me if I ever thought about what people must assume when I show up with a man who's got oil under his fingernails. But I've never been more certain about someone in my life. I thought maybe, just maybe, if they sat down with him at my birthday, shared a meal, saw the way he looked at me, things would finally shift. So I planned it all out, reserved the space, ordered trays of fried catfish, baked mac cornbread muffins stacked high. I even got peach cobbler from Miss Anita's over on Gentry because it's my dad's favorite. I laid out name cards, folded linen napkins, lit little glass candles just to make it nice. Eric came early to help set up, even put on a collared shirt, though I know he hates buttons. We joked around while stringing balloons, and for a few minutes I forgot how tense things had been lately. I kept checking my phone thinking maybe someone was running late. Then came the message, just 5 words. I read it twice. My hands were still sticky from tying knots and ribbon when I opened Instagram, and there they were, my dad, my mom, my brother, and my aunt lined up by a pool in Miami, tan drinks in hand, captioned, "Finally together." No mention of me, no clue that they were out of town, no apology, just sunglasses and smiles. I didn't say a word. I just looked up at Eric and nodded when he asked if we should eat. We sat down at a table meant for 10. The cornbread was still warm. The candles on the table flickered while the air grew heavier around me. I sat beside Eric, our plates full, the room quiet except for the soft hum of the ceiling fan. The decorations I'd carefully picked out felt out of place now, like they belonged to someone else's party. The pink and gold balloons hovered in the corner untouched. A tray of catfish sat between us, still warm, but I'd lost my appetite. Eric didn't push. He cut into his food, offered me half a roll, and tried to carry the silence without making it worse. I chewed slowly, trying to keep my hands from shaking. I didn't say much, but I knew he could feel it the way my world had shifted just slightly off its axis. I kept my phone face down on the table. I couldn't look at it again. Not yet. We finished what we could and packed up the rest quietly, thanking the staff as we left. The hostess gave me a polite smile, her eyes darting toward the empty chairs behind us. I nodded, held the door open for Eric, and stepped out into the warm Mississippi evening. Back home, I took off my shoes and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor for a long time. Eric leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, waiting. He didn't speak until I did. They knew I said finally, my voice low. They knew it was my birthday. They RSVP'd, and they left town. He didn't say much, just crossed the room and sat beside me, rubbing my back slowly. That night, I barely slept. My mind wouldn't stop running through all the years I'd shown up for them. Rent forgiveness, car repairs, last-minute help when my brother's checks bounced again, birthday cakes and holiday meals, and somehow I still ended up alone in a room built for 10. The next morning, I made coffee and stared out the kitchen window while the sun came up. Eric had already left for the shop. I sat at the table with my laptop, opened my property management portal, and scrolled through the family leases. The numbers stared back at me, plain as day. My mom and dad's rent, half the going rate for a 2-bedroom in Jackson. My aunt, a similar deal. Brad's commercial lease, laughable. $500 a month for a storefront worth $4,000 easy. I'd given it all without a contract, without an end date, because they were family. They'd use that word every time they needed a favor. Family. But not when it came to respect. Not when it came to Eric. Not when it came to something as simple as showing up to dinner. I poured a second cup of coffee and opened my email. My hand hovered over the keyboard for a long time before I started typing. New lease agreements, market rate, 30-day notices. I wasn't sure what I was feeling, anger maybe, but it didn't come with yelling or tears. It just came with quiet certainty. By early afternoon, I had every lease redrafted. I clicked send on all 3, then sat back in my chair, heart pounding. I stared at the screen a few more seconds, then opened a separate file. The commercial property, the one my brother used as his office. That building had history. It was my first big acquisition after my 3rd duplex. A strip mall on the edge of town, not flashy, but reliable. 5 storefronts, decent tenants. Brad had begged me for the corner unit, swearing he had a plan to launch a consulting firm. He brought in a few clients, made a lot of noise, and mostly sat behind a desk playing manager. His rent was a token amount, and every time I considered raising it, my dad called it an investment in the family's future. I opened my contacts and called Michelle, my real estate agent. "I'm ready to list the strip mall," I said. There was a pause. All of it. All of it. Within a few hours, she had a buyer lined up. A developer from Biloxi looking to expand. Full cash offer, no conditions, and 20% over what I'd expected. I read through the preliminary paperwork, took a deep breath, and signed. By the time dinner rolled around, my phone had started lighting up. The first message came from my mom. "What's this about rent?" Then, Brad. A rapid-fire chain of texts, all caps and exclamation points. "You can't do this. This is my business." Aunt Nina followed with one of her usual dramatic texts, paragraph after paragraph, about how I was being cruel, tearing the family apart. Then my dad. His message was short and sharp. "This is low, even for you." I put the phone face down again. Eric got home around 6. I slid the phone across the table, and he scrolled through the texts. He didn't say anything right away, just shook his head, gave a small smile, and said, "They didn't see you coming." I nodded, not in triumph, not in anger, just in understanding. That night the calls started, one after the other. By the time I went to bed, I'd counted nearly 30 missed calls and a voicemail box that was full. The next morning, I opened my inbox to see that the strip mall sale was progressing ahead of schedule. We were looking at closing in 2 weeks. Brad's business would be without a home. I checked the other leases. Read receipts confirmed they'd all seen them. No one had replied formally, just texts, voicemails, and half-baked guilt trips. But I didn't need their replies. I'd said what needed to be said in rent terms and legal notices. I poured another cup of coffee and watched the sun rise again. The kitchen felt quieter than usual, but it wasn't an empty quiet. It was peaceful. They'd made their choice. And now, so had I. The third day after my birthday, the messages were still coming in. Most of them followed the same rhythm: shock, guilt, indignation. My brother sent a voice note saying he couldn't afford $2,000 a month. My mom tried again, softer this time, asking if we could just talk. Aunt Nina wrote a long paragraph about family values, about how she never thought I'd be the one to draw blood. My dad didn't bother pretending. His last text was just 6 words: "You're making a mistake. Fix it." I turned the phone over on the counter and let the screen go dark. The dishwasher hummed in the background, the smell of last night's coffee still faint in the air. Outside the kitchen window, the oak trees swayed gently. I let myself stand there for a while, doing nothing. After breakfast, I logged back into my property files and reviewed everything one more time. The lease adjustments had gone through. The commercial sale was moving. Brad's office space would be out of my hands in 12 days. Every step was legally sound. I double-checked with my property manager the day before. That afternoon, Eric got home early from the shop. I was sitting on the porch reading over the listing documents one more time. He handed me a to-go cup of sweet tea from the diner on Ridge Road and sat down beside me. "They still trying to wear you down?" he asked. I nodded once. He didn't ask to see my phone. He didn't need to. We sat in silence, the wind picking up around us, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something give way, not relief exactly, but a sense that the noise was finally starting to fade. When I first started in real estate, I didn't think any of this would ever matter. I was 25, fresh off my grandmother's funeral, holding a check that barely covered a down payment. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing until the paperwork was signed. My parents thought I was being reckless. Brad told me I should have bought a new car instead. The duplex was old, sagging a bit on one side with rusted gutters and a tree root growing up through the backyard concrete. I gutted the kitchen myself. I didn't sleep much that year. I remember eating cereal on the floor at midnight with paint on my arms and thinking, this is what starting over feels like. When I bought my second property, my mom started calling it our little empire. My dad liked to tell people at church that I was investing on the family's behalf. They didn't ask to see the bank statements or help with the repairs, but they liked the way it sounded. Then came the first ask. My brother had taken out a loan on a used car lot and couldn't cover the lease on his office space. I offered him a room in the strip mall for almost nothing. He promised he'd make it back in 6 months. That was 4 years ago. Years. Next came the favor calls. My dad asking if I could push back the rent due date. My mom needing help with new appliances. Aunt Nina's roof repair. Each time it was framed as a small ask, just a little help while they figured things out. I gave in every single time. When Eric came into my life, things shifted in ways I didn't expect. Not just emotionally, though that too, but logistically. I finally had someone to talk to who didn't make me feel like my success was a family resource. He noticed things, like how I'd avoid checking my texts on the first of the month, how I got quiet when we drove past my aunt's building, or when my brother posted photos of himself in a new watch while his rent sat unpaid for weeks. My family hated that Eric didn't play along. They called him names when they thought I wasn't listening. My dad once asked if Eric even filed taxes. My mom called him a phase. And Brad, well, he didn't even try to hide the way he rolled his eyes when Eric was around. Still, I kept showing up. I didn't raise their rent. I didn't cut them off. I told myself I could hold the weight as long as it meant keeping the peace. But peace, as I learned that night at the restaurant, had nothing to do with me. I think what struck me most about that photo from Miami wasn't that they'd gone on a trip. It was that they chose that day. Out of all the weekends, they chose the one day they knew I'd be waiting at a dinner table with a candle lit just for them. They didn't forget. They didn't miss a flight. They didn't have an emergency. They planned around me and pretended I didn't exist. And then they posted about it for everyone to see. That kind of thing sticks, not just in the heart, but in the bones. The next evening I sat down with Eric again. He was fixing something under the kitchen sink when I walked in with a folder full of documents. I waited for him to finish wiping his hands before I slid it across the table. "What's this?" he asked. Every lease I said, every property, all 6 buildings plus the strip mall, and a breakdown of how much I've written off for the last 5 years. He opened the folder slowly and glanced through the pages. "That's a lot of zeros," he said quietly. "I just wanted it all in one place," I said. "So I don't forget. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to." The following morning, I received a call from my real estate agent confirming the developer had finalized the cash offer. No contingencies, no delays, closing in 9 days. The sale of the strip mall would leave Brad without a workspace. I hadn't told him yet, but the moment the paperwork cleared, he'd get the notice from the property manager. I went back to my email and checked for updates on the residential leases. My mother's hadn't been opened. Neither had Aunt Nina's. My father's had been read twice. Brad's lease showed a red exclamation mark undelivered. His email had been deactivated. I made a note to notify the property manager directly. That afternoon I got a text from my mom. "We need to talk." I stared at it for a long while, then locked the screen again and placed the phone face down. The silence was no longer unfamiliar, and for the first time it didn't feel like punishment. It felt like distance. And distance, I was learning, could also mean peace. The morning after my mother's text, I stood at the kitchen counter with a notepad and a red pen. I'd barely touched my coffee. The pages in front of me were scribbled with numbers, notes, reminders from leases, and pending payments. It was quiet, except for the ticking of the clock and the faint clinking of Eric rinsing something in the sink. I flipped the notepad closed and looked up. "I think they really believed I wouldn't push back," I said. Eric didn't respond right away. He dried his hands on a dish towel, folded it neatly, and leaned against the counter across from me. His expression didn't change, but I could tell he was waiting to see where I was headed. "They've depended on me for years," I said more to myself than to him. "Not just the rent, but the way they talk to me. The way they look at you." He met my eyes. "So what now?" I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the folder beside me, the one with every lease and property record organized in tabs. Something had shifted after my birthday. At first I thought it was just anger, but it wasn't. It was something more final. By late afternoon, I was at my desk again reviewing the sale agreement for the strip mall. The buyer's attorney had returned the paperwork with minor edits, nothing that would hold us up. Closing was still on track for the end of the week. I forwarded everything to my agent, then leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. I thought about my brother Brad and his makeshift consulting firm. The business cards, the vacant waiting room, the empty promises about scaling up. All of it had been smoke and mirrors. He used my property as his prop, and I'd let him. It had gone on too long. That evening I sat with Eric on the porch. The sun had dropped low and the sky was soft with orange and pink. He handed me a blanket for my lap and didn't say much. We listened to the sounds of the street, a car passing now and then, a few kids riding bikes near the end of the block. "I'm not sure when I stopped recognizing them," I said quietly. "Your family?" I nodded. I kept telling myself they'd come around, that if I worked hard enough, they'd see me differently. But they were never going to. Eric shifted in his seat, adjusting his shoulder against the armrest. "They saw you just fine," he said. "They just didn't expect you to stop playing the part." We didn't talk after that, not about them. We just sat there until the porch light clicked on automatically and the bugs started buzzing louder in the grass. The next morning my phone buzzed with a call from my property manager. She'd received another complaint from my Aunt Nina this time about unreasonable expectations in her updated lease. I listened to her recap the call, thanked her for handling it, and hung up. Not long after that, I got a voicemail from my dad. His voice was clipped like he was holding something back. He said he didn't understand why I was making things harder than they had to be. Said I was punishing them for no reason. I deleted it and kept going. By noon, I was back at my desk. I opened a new file and began drafting a formal policy change across all my rental properties. From now on, no family member, current or future, would be allowed to rent below market rate. All agreements would require legal counsel on both sides. No verbal extensions, no side favors. I emailed the new policy to my attorney for review. She replied within the hour, smart move and long overdue. That evening, Eric grilled chicken on the back patio while I folded laundry inside. I paused at one of his work shirts, oil-stained at the collar, frayed slightly at the cuffs. I held it for a moment before folding it into a neat square and stacking it on the bench near the door. It hit me then, clear and still. They didn't just look down on Eric. They looked down on me for choosing him, for choosing the kind of life that didn't fit their picture. They'd shown me who they were loud and clear, and for the first time, I believed them. I walked outside and handed Eric a glass of water. He was standing at the grill watching the flames rise slightly as he flipped the last piece of chicken. "I want to talk to a tax consultant," I said. He looked up surprised. "I'm thinking about restructuring everything. The company, the property ownership. Maybe putting some things in a trust." Eric raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. "I want it all locked down," I said. "No more loose ends. No more open doors they can try to walk through." He nodded slowly. "I know a guy who works with real estate investors. I'll get his number." We ate dinner inside with the windows open. The air smelled like smoke and pine, and for a few minutes the house felt steady. I cleared the table while Eric rinsed the dishes. As I reached to turn off the kitchen light, my phone buzzed again. A message from Brad. It was shorter than usual, just one line. "We're still family, Rachel. Don't forget that." I stared at the screen for a long time before powering it off. That night I slept with the bedroom window open, the fan humming above me, and a notebook on the nightstand beside the bed. It had a single line written on the front page, "Take back what's mine." By Friday morning, I was up early with a clipboard in my hand and 2 phones on the counter. The property sale had gone through overnight. I'd checked my email 3 times just to be sure before the confirmation hit my inbox signed, "Sealed Wired." The strip mall was no longer mine, which meant my brother no longer had a business address. I stood at the kitchen sink while the coffee brewed, listening to the familiar sounds of the neighborhood waking up. A delivery truck rumbled down the street. Somewhere a dog barked at nothing. I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel tense. Just clear. I poured a cup and sat at the table, flipping through the folder I'd built over the past few days. Updated rental agreements, closing documents, notes from the attorney, letters prepared for the tenants I'd carried too long. Everything was lined up. Everything had a date. Around mid-morning, I called my property manager and asked her to send out formal notices to the residential tenants whose leases had shifted my parents' Aunt Nina and one other family that had been receiving a long-standing discount at my father's request. Each of them would now have 60 days to transition to full market rent. No exceptions, no extensions. If they couldn't stay, they'd have to go. I didn't say much else on the call. My property manager didn't ask any questions. She simply said she'd take care of it and that she'd update the portal by end of day. Later that afternoon, I stopped by the bank to handle a few adjustments. While I waited in the lobby, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my messages. There was a new one from Brad. He hadn't responded to the sale, not directly, but his message was short. "I hope you're proud of yourself." I locked the screen and slipped the phone into my purse. That evening, Eric grilled out again. I sat nearby in the patio chair, shelling fresh peas into a metal bowl, while the sun dipped behind the trees. We didn't talk much, just passed things back and forth the way we always had. When the food was done, we ate at the small table under the porch light. It was calm, quiet, and steady. After dinner, I checked my messages again. 3 missed calls from my mom, 1 from my aunt, and a voicemail from my father I didn't open. I let them sit. By Monday, the notices had gone out. One by one, I watched the tenant accounts update in the software. Most showed received, a few remained unopened, but I didn't follow up. That was for the property office to handle. I spent the day meeting with a tax consultant. Eric had referred a woman named Denise with a quiet voice and sharp memory. She walked me through restructuring options, trust protections, and ownership shifts. We spent 2 hours going through each line. By the end of the meeting, I had a path forward and the name of an estate attorney she recommended. That night, I went home and typed it all up. I wasn't trying to make a statement. I was building a wall, one they couldn't climb back over, even if they tried. Around 9, the doorbell rang. Eric looked at me from the hallway, waiting. I stood still for a moment, then stepped forward and opened the door. My parents stood on the porch, both of them dressed like they'd come from church, though I knew they hadn't. My dad had his hands in his pockets, his mouth set tight. My mom looked tired, holding her purse with both hands in front of her, like she was bracing for something. "Can we come in?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. I just stepped back and held the door open. They walked in and stood in the middle of the living room, glancing around like they hadn't been there in years. I didn't offer drinks. I didn't ask them to sit. My dad was the first to speak. "This isn't how family treats each other." I didn't say anything. "We've always supported you," he went on. "We were there when you got your license, helped you get your feet under you." I stayed quiet. My mother stepped in, her tone softer. "We just needed some space. That trip to Miami, it wasn't what you think." I looked at her. "You posted it the day of my birthday." She opened her mouth, closed it, then said, "It wasn't meant to hurt you." "You didn't tell me," I said. "You RSVP'd to dinner. You confirmed the time, and then you left town." My dad stepped forward, his voice rising. "We don't have to explain ourselves. You're the one raising rent, cutting people off, treating your brother like a stranger." I stared at him. Brad was never on the lease. His name was never on the building, and he never paid what that space was worth. "It was a family favor," my dad said. I shook my head. "It was a business arrangement you took for granted." My mother's voice cracked. "We didn't mean for it to fall apart like this. It's just gotten so cold." I looked at them both. "It didn't get cold. You just didn't expect me to close the door." They stood there for a moment. Then my father's phone buzzed. He checked it, muttered something under his breath, and put it back in his pocket. "I hope you're happy," he said. I didn't respond. They left without another word. Eric came in from the garage a few minutes later. "They gone?" he asked. I nodded. He walked past me, grabbed a glass of water, and didn't say much else. The next morning, my phone buzzed with an email alert. I tapped it open and saw the subject line, "Credit Inquiry Notification." My stomach dropped. I scrolled down and found an application tied to my name. Someone had attempted to open a $50,000 business loan using my credit. The address listed was familiar, my brother's. I called the bank, immediately confirmed the request hadn't been approved yet, and filed a fraud report. Within minutes, the application was flagged. I froze, my credit updated my alerts, and called my attorney. She asked for documentation, said she'd begin tracking any related activity. I sat at the table for a long time after that. The light outside had shifted by the time Eric walked in and saw me there. "What's wrong?" I handed him my phone. He read the alert, then set it down carefully. "What are you going to do?" "I already did it," I said. I didn't feel shaken. I didn't feel surprised. Just steady, focused. By the end of the week, the loan application had been officially denied, and the report was sealed. My brother didn't reach out, not at first, but the silence wasn't going to last. The weekend passed with no word from Brad. After the loan denial, the silence was louder than any voicemail he could have left. I didn't chase it. I spent the time reviewing the new business filings with my attorney and double-checking my credit alerts. Everything was locked down. It was Tuesday morning when I got a text from Nathan. "Need to talk. It's about your brother. Can I come by today?" Nathan Mitchell had been my broker on the first property I ever bought. We'd known each other since my mid-20s, worked on a few deals since. He wasn't the kind to get dramatic, so when I read that message, my stomach tightened. I told him to come by that afternoon. Eric was still at the shop when Nathan pulled into the driveway. He stepped out of his car with a manila folder in one hand and a look that said, this wasn't going to be a short visit. We sat at the kitchen table, and I offered him a glass of water. He waved it off and got right to the point. One of my clients forwarded me something they thought you should see, he said. He reached into the folder and slid out a printed email thread. It had Brad's name in the subject line. He's been shopping your properties, Nathan said, claiming he has power of attorney over your portfolio. Told the buyer you're mentally unwell and he's stepping in to manage things for the family. I didn't speak for a moment. My hands rested flat on the table as I read the words. The pitch was full of made-up numbers and wild claims. Brad was offering to sell off 3 of my buildings as a bundle properties he didn't own, couldn't access, and had no authority over. Nathan cleared his throat gently. The buyer got spooked when he saw your name. He's worked with me before. Figured I should know. I nodded once. Did Brad give him documents? Faked some. But nothing official. Just enough to stall the conversation. My guy never signed anything. I folded the papers and set them aside. My chest was tight, but not with panic. It was something colder than that. What's his angle? I asked. Desperation, Nathan said. He's talking to shady developers, looking for fast money. I'd bet he's deep in something bad and he's trying to cover it with your equity. I thanked Nathan for bringing it to me. He stood up, gave me a steady look, and said I'd move quick. Lock it all down. After he left, I sat in the quiet house and watched the sunlight shift across the floorboards. Brad hadn't just tried to pull a loan behind my back. He was actively trying to erase me, to sell what I'd built, and write me out of the story completely. I called my attorney, Jennifer Marks, who had handled my contracts for years. When she picked up, I told her everything. She listened, asked a few short questions, and told me she'd start looking for any other attempts tied to my name. If Brad was contacting other investors or forging documents, she wanted to get ahead of it. We hung up, and I walked out to the porch. Eric had just pulled into the driveway and waved when he saw me. I didn't say anything until he reached the steps. I need to tell you something, I said. We sat on the porch swing. I walked him through the whole meeting with Nathan, the forged sale pitch, the lie about power of attorney. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he let out a slow breath and shook his head. He really thought he could get away with that. I nodded. He's counting on me being quiet. Eric looked out at the yard, then back at me. Not anymore, though. That night, while Eric cleaned up dinner, I opened my laptop to catch up on emails. There was one from Jennifer marked urgent. I clicked it. She had found something buried in the estate records, an account tied to my grandmother's name, one that had never been activated. It was a trust fund. $500,000 left to me alone. There was a condition. It could only be accessed once I fully cut off financial support to my family. No discounted rent, no loans, no favors. Jennifer had attached the documents and a scanned copy of the original letter my grandmother had written. The terms were clear. My name, my signature. Her reasoning. She had written, "This is for the moment she realizes what I already know, that her heart will keep giving even to those who do not return it. This fund is for her freedom." I read the letter twice, then again. The timing didn't feel real. I called Jennifer. "Is this valid?" I asked. Every word she said. "You've already met the criteria. I can begin the transfer." I sat there, the phone pressed to my ear, unsure what to say. $500,000, sitting there waiting for me to stop bleeding for people who wouldn't even show up to a birthday dinner. "Yes," I said finally. "Let's do it." I told Eric after we'd turned off the lights. We were sitting in bed, the windows open, the ceiling fan clicking softly overhead. "My grandmother left a trust," I said. "I didn't know. Jennifer just found it. It activates now, because I cut them off." He looked at me, then reached over and squeezed my hand. "She knew." I guess she did. We lay there for a long time without speaking. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because somehow the silence felt full. By the end of the week, the fund was in motion. Jennifer filed the final documents. The estate account would clear within 2 business days. I emailed my property manager to put alerts on all my properties flag, any inquiry from outside agents or unknown third parties. I asked her to contact me immediately if anyone claimed to speak on my behalf. I reached out to a second attorney and started paperwork to secure ownership transfers under a new holding company, this time with layered protection. Eric helped me scan old documents into encrypted backups. Nathan connected me with a forensic accountant in case we needed evidence of Brad's activity. The trust fund wasn't just money, it was a net, a boundary. And now that I had it, I wasn't going to waste a single part of it proving my worth to people who'd never cared to see it in the first place. 1 month after I froze my credit, filed the fraud report, and triggered my grandmother's trust, the pieces started shifting. Not in one big dramatic moment, but gradually like a tide rolling out. One by one, the people who had built their lives around me began running out of sand. My Aunt Nina moved first. Her unit showed up as vacated in the property dashboard. I hadn't heard directly from her, but my property manager noted that she left behind a note in the mailbox about rising costs and bad timing. The unit was clean, but empty. No goodbye. A week later, I received a formal lease termination notice from my parents. They were moving into a smaller apartment across town, one of those outdated complexes off the highway with no elevator and thin walls. The forwarding address had a unit letter at the ND. My mother used to call any address with a letter after it a shoebox for college kids. I checked the dashboard again. Their deposit had been depleted over the past year from unpaid repairs. The final balance owed wasn't large, but I marked it uncollectible and moved on. My brother lasted the longest. After the strip mall sale closed, I assumed he'd go quiet. But about a week later, I received a text from him, short like always. "This is bigger than you. You're tearing the family apart." I didn't respond. He followed up with another message the next day. This one a little more careful. "If you just talk to me, we could work something out. I've got people willing to help, real buyers. You don't have to do this alone." I deleted it without opening the thread. By mid-month, the office space he once occupied had been turned into a vape shop with a fresh coat of paint and a bright red awning. I drove past it once on the way to meet a contractor and barely recognized the place. My mother tried again. She left a voicemail early one morning, her voice slower than usual. "You know your father's been struggling with all of this. We didn't mean to hurt you, Rachel. We just thought you'd understand. He's not well. And Brad's been under so much pressure. You're still part of us. We just want to go back to how things were." I saved the message, but I didn't reply. Eric and I had just signed the final paperwork on the new holding company that would house all of my properties. The trust had officially cleared $500,000 deposited into a business development account under my name. Jennifer and I sat together over coffee one afternoon and laid out a 5-year plan. Renovations, new purchases, expanded staffing. I'd never felt more steady. My dad never called, but I heard from a neighbor that he'd picked up part-time work for a rideshare company. They said he'd been spotted outside the old strip mall with a clipboard asking if tenants remembered him. My mom started working at a grocery store. I saw her once in the checkout lane while I waited behind a family with a full cart. She didn't look up. I didn't either. Nathan called one evening checking in. "Brad's out," he said. "Out word as the developers stopped taking his calls. Your lawyer must have scared them off. Nobody wants a forged deal on record." I thanked him and said I appreciated the heads up. He laughed quietly and said, "You don't sound surprised." "I'm not," I said. At home, Eric and I spent the weekend reorganizing the office room into a dedicated workspace for the company. We ordered a desk and printer, cleared out the last few boxes of old paperwork, and hung a small whiteboard near the window. He handed me a roll of tape and grinned. "You know this room's never going back to storage, right?" "Good," I said. I don't plan on shrinking. He nodded, then leaned in the doorway. Your phone's been buzzing. I walked over and checked it. 3 messages from Brad in a row. Just talk to me. You're ruining everything. You'll regret this. I stood there with the screen in my hand, the ceiling fan clicking gently above me. Eric waited but didn't say a word. I turned the phone face down and left it on the table. Later that week, Jennifer emailed me a summary of everything we'd locked down: leases updated, LLCs, restructured trust, funded, all outstanding threats monitored. She had flagged 2 more attempted inquiries under my name, both from email accounts tied to Brad's old business domain. They'd gone nowhere. She ended her message with a short note, "It's done. They don't hold the keys anymore." I read that line twice, then closed the laptop. That evening, I sat outside on the back porch while Eric watered the plants. I sipped my tea and watched the light fade across the yard. For the first time in months, the tension in my shoulders wasn't there. They'd tried everything. Silence, guilt, pressure, lies. They thought I would fold. But I hadn't. And now the door was shut, locked, reinforced. The week the last lease expired, I drove by one of the buildings just to see it for myself. The curtains in my parents' old unit were drawn, the porch light off. A new couple had signed the lease a few days before young teachers, according to the property manager. They'd asked for a fresh coat of paint and a garden bed out front. I approved both without hesitation. Back home, Eric was fixing the latch on the back gate. I stood at the edge of the yard watching him work in the late afternoon sun. He looked up when he saw me, gave that quiet smile I knew by heart, and nodded toward the kitchen. "There's tea in the fridge," he said. I stepped inside, poured a glass, and leaned against the counter. The house felt settled. Not just clean or quiet settled. The air didn't hold tension anymore. No unread messages, no games to decipher. Just space. A few days later, I met with our accountant to go over King Properties' second quarter numbers. We'd acquired 2 new units on the east side, small places, but in good condition. Eric had already made a list of repairs he wanted to handle himself, said it felt good to work on something that mattered. I agreed. Nathan connected us with another investor who was interested in partnering on a community housing initiative. The trust fund had given us leverage, not just financially, but mentally. We weren't building someone else's vision. We were building our own. My parents never reached out again. My aunt sent a birthday card that arrived late and unsigned. Brad tried once more, emailing a vague apology about family pressure and bad decisions. I let it sit in the inbox unopened. I didn't need an apology. Not anymore. They'd shown me who they were when they thought I had nothing left to take from me. That clarity, painful as it was, became the foundation for everything that followed. The truth is, I didn't stop loving them. I just stopped offering myself up to be drained. I think my grandmother saw it coming. All those years ago when she wrote the conditions of that trust, she must have known it would only be needed when I finally let go. Not of her, but of the version of myself that believed love meant always giving more, even when nothing came back. She gave me the gift of a future that didn't require anyone's permission. Eric and I still work late some nights going over listings or tenant requests. But we end every day the same home-cooked dinner porch light on music low in the background. We talk about the people we're helping now. The young couple saving for their first home. The single mom with twins who cried when she saw the new dishwasher. The retired bus driver who brings in cookies every month when rent is due. This isn't just property anymore. It's purpose. And it's ours. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening, for staying with me, and for making space for stories like mine. And if you've ever had to walk away from people you thought would stand by you, just know you're not wrong for choosing peace. You're not wrong for choosing you. Take care of yourself first. The rest will follow. If this story meant something to you, I hope you'll share it, or just leave a comment about where you're listening from. I'd love to know who's out there, and if you're building your own version of home brick by brick, choice by choice, I hope you know you're already farther along than you think.